So we've had a hell of a week in crypto. Here we are on Friday, February 18th, and there's almost too many stories to talk about in a quick recap, but let's just go through them. The first thing is, obviously, we've seen a pretty large correction. Bitcoin's down somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% from the highs that were earlier this week, but that's really not that important. We have the Russia-Ukraine situation causing financial assets around the world broadly to sell off, and people worried about skyrocketing oil prices, etc. And that's interesting, and one might say, well, but if Bitcoin's an inflation hedge, shouldn't it be going up? And there's truth to that, except for the fact that Bitcoin is also a risk asset. Now, when I say Bitcoin is a risk asset, I explain it very simply. Bitcoin effectively is an option on its own adoption. If Bitcoin becomes globally accepted as a store of value, its price will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 times higher, or potentially significantly more in today's dollars. So the issue of how it's going to trade really is a question of risk versus return. People who are betting on this often classify it as a risk asset as a small piece of their portfolio. The on-chain data, however, shows that most Bitcoin owners are growing in length, i.e. hodling, as they say in the Bitcoin community, holding on to it. So it's really a question of who on the margin are the marginal buyers versus the marginal sellers. Those are the ones who tend to have Bitcoin trading more like risk. So what else has been going on this week? Well, the biggest news, and frankly one that I think will propel Bitcoin towards its natural evolution as that global store of value, is out of Canada. Now, at the end of the day, if you had asked me 2 months ago, or pretty much any time in my life, if it was most likely that Canada, of all countries, would be the one to show the need for censorship-resistant asset, I would have said, you're crazy. I mean, it never occurred to me. But think about what Justin Trudeau did this week. By essentially freezing bank accounts without due process, and telling people you cannot donate to what is largely a peaceful presentation, if an annoying one, for the infrastructure of Ottawa, he effectively said the government has de facto control over your financial assets whenever they wish, with no due process. Now, there's lots of implications for freedom of speech. Personally, as someone who believes in individual liberty and freedom, I find it reprehensible, but that's irrelevant. What's very relevant is what are people's response? Well, the natural response of most people is to say, I don't want the government to have full control. Well, the government does have control over the legacy banking system. God forbid they had a central bank digital currency where they could programmably effectively stop you from being able to save money, spend money, or seize your assets. It'd be even worse. So look at what Bitcoin gives you as an alternative. Sure, they can stop you from sending Bitcoin into and out of the global financial system, but they can never truly take it away from you if you own it. Jesse Powell, the CEO of Kraken, had a very frank, very interesting tweet this morning where effectively he told people, listen, if you're concerned about this, take your Bitcoins off exchange and self-custody them. At least then you'll be able to use it P2P to other people, person to person, peer to peer. And that's kind of important. Bitcoin has that ability. Now, is it perfect? No. Does it perform more like cash, like the actual paper stuff, or the actual gold coins that people used to use? Yes. And that means it has extra value. Think about that when one looks at the long term, because Bitcoin has always been considered a hedge against central bank profligacy, money printing. Money printer goes burr. Now you have an undercurrent of Bitcoin protects at least assets, not just in third world countries with potentates, but in actual G7 countries with supposedly democratic elected governments. That is a very big deal. My expectation is when the dust clears and financial markets stabilize, this will attract a whole new generation, a whole new group of large Bitcoin buyers. Remember, the market really isn't that elastic. If you got those buyers, that's what you could see in the next bull run for Bitcoin. But we shall see. Right now, Ukraine dominates the Federal Reserve, raising rates, inflation being up dominates, and so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out over the next few months.